The story begins in a small, quiet southern town where life moves at a slow pace. The streets are lined with old brick buildings, and the air carries the faint scent of pine trees. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay hidden for long. But beneath its peaceful surface, the town is struggling under the weight of corruption. At the heart of it all is Judge Richard Holloway, a man feared by many for his ruthless tactics and shady dealings. He rules the courtroom like a king, bending laws to suit his interests and crushing anyone who dares question him. Into this tense environment steps Marcus Johnson, a tall, well-built man with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes that seem to notice everything. Marcus arrives in town without much fanfare. He rents a modest apartment above a bakery and takes up work as a mechanic at a local garage. To the townsfolk, he's just another face in the crowd, a quiet outsider trying to make ends meet. But what they don't know is that Marcus isn't who he appears to be. In reality, he's an undercover governor sent by the state to investigate allegations of widespread corruption in the judicial system. His mission: to gather concrete evidence against Judge Holloway and bring him to justice. Marcus spends his first few days observing the town and its people. He listens carefully to conversations at the diner, watches how people interact on the streets, and studies the dynamics between the locals and those in positions of power. He notices the fear in people's eyes whenever Judge Holloway's name comes up. Some speak in hushed tones about unfair fines or unjust rulings, while others avoid the topic altogether. It doesn't take long for Marcus to realize that the judge has a tight grip on the town, and no one feels safe challenging him. Despite his undercover status, Marcus can't help but feel a pang of frustration every time he hears about someone being mistreated. He knows he has to play his part carefully, though, so he keeps his emotions in check and continues blending in. At the garage, he earns the trust of his coworkers with his hard work and easygoing nature. They invite him out for drinks after work, and Marcus uses these opportunities to learn more about the town's history and the people living there. But Marcus's presence doesn't go unnoticed. Judge Holloway, always suspicious of newcomers, starts hearing whispers about the new guy in town. One afternoon, while having lunch at the diner, the judge overhears two elderly women talking about Marcus. "He seems nice enough," one says, "but you never know with outsiders." The comment sticks with Holloway, planting a seed of unease in his mind. Who is this man, really? And why did he choose to settle in such a small, unremarkable town? For now, Marcus remains focused on his mission, biding his time and gathering information. Little does he know that his encounter with Judge Holloway is closer than he thinks, and when it happens, it will set off a chain of events that changes the town forever. The calm rhythm of Marcus's days in the small town was about to be disrupted, though he didn't know it yet. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Marcus decided to take a drive after finishing work at the garage. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the streets. He drove slowly, enjoying the peacefulness of the town as he headed toward his apartment. But just as he turned onto Main Street, flashing red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Marcus pulled over calmly, his mind racing with questions. Had he done something wrong? He replayed the last few minutes in his head, but couldn't think of any reason why he'd been stopped. As Officer Daniels approached the car, Marcus rolled down his window and greeted him politely. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Officer Daniels, a burly man with a scowl permanently etched on his face, didn't return the courtesy. Instead, he barked, "You were speeding back there. Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" Marcus frowned slightly, certain he hadn't exceeded the limit. "I don't think so," he replied evenly. "I've been driving carefully." Daniels leaned closer, his tone dripping with disdain. "Carefully? That's not what I saw. You were weaving all over the road." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Daniels cut him off. "License and registration, please." Reluctantly, Marcus handed them over, knowing arguing would only make things worse. As Daniels examined the documents, His expression shifted from irritation to curiosity. Something about this man felt different. Maybe it was the way Marcus carried himself, calm and composed, even under pressure, or maybe it was the lack of fear in his voice. Either way, Daniel sensed that Marcus wasn't someone to underestimate. Still, he wasn't about to let him off easily. After jotting down some notes, Daniel handed back the papers and issued Marcus a ticket for speeding. "Appeal it if you want," Daniel said with a smirk, clearly doubting Marcus would follow through. "But trust me, it won't do you much good around here." With that, he walked away, leaving Marcus sitting in stunned silence. When Marcus arrived at his apartment later that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stop had been more than just a routine traffic check. It wasn't uncommon for officers like Daniels to target outsiders, especially those who seemed out of place. And given Judge Holloway's reputation, Marcus suspected the judge might already be keeping tabs on him. This thought sent a chill down his spine, but also reinforced his determination to stay vigilant. The next morning, Marcus showed up at the courthouse, ready to contest the ticket. The room buzzed with activity as people shuffled in and out, some looking anxious, others resigned. When his name was called, Marcus stepped forward and stood respectfully before Judge Holloway. The judge glanced up briefly, his cold eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at Marcus, as if trying to size him up. "I understand you're disputing the charge against you," Judge Holloway began, his voice dripping with condescension. Before Marcus could respond, the judge continued, "Do you often question authority, Mr. Johnson, or is it just when it suits your purposes?" Marcus kept his composure, choosing his words carefully. "Your Honor, I believe the ticket was issued unfairly. I wasn't speeding, and I'd appreciate the chance to clarify." "Clarify?" Judge Holloway interrupted sharply, slamming his gavel down hard enough to echo through the room. "This court doesn't need clarification. What it needs is respect." His voice rose, drawing stares from the spectators. "For wasting our time, you'll pay a fine of $50,000 for contempt of court. Consider this a lesson in humility." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the bailiff looked startled by the absurdity of the amount. Marcus, however, remained outwardly calm. Inside, though, his mind was racing. This wasn't just injustice. It was a calculated display of power meant to intimidate. And it worked. No one dared speak up or challenge the ruling. As Marcus left the courthouse, he knew this moment was the beginning of something bigger. Judge Holloway had underestimated him, thinking he was just another ordinary citizen who would fold under pressure. But Marcus wasn't ordinary, and this outrageous fine would soon become the key to exposing the truth. The news of Marcus's $50,000 fine spread like wildfire through the small town. By mid-morning, it was the talk of every corner, inside the diner, at the gas station, and even in hushed whispers during church services. People couldn't believe what had happened. A simple traffic ticket turning into a massive fine for contempt of court seemed outrageous to most, but no one dared say it out loud. Judge Holloway's reputation loomed large over everyone, and challenging him meant risking your livelihood, or worse. For Marcus, the reaction of the townspeople wasn't surprising. He'd already seen how fear shaped their lives, keeping them silent even when they knew something was wrong. What did catch his attention, however, were the subtle signs of support he began receiving. At the garage where he worked, his coworkers avoided discussing the incident directly, but they made sure to give him extra breaks or offered to cover shifts if he needed time off. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who ran the bakery below his apartment, slipped him a note one morning that read, "Stay strong." It was small gestures like these that reminded Marcus why he was here, to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway sat in his chambers, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. Something about Marcus didn't sit right with him. The man hadn't panicked or begged for leniency like others usually did. Instead, he'd remained calm and composed, almost as if he expected things to play out this way. Holloway tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought. Was Marcus simply naive, or was there more to him than met the eye? Determined to get answers, Holloway summoned Officer Daniels to his office later that day. "I want you to look into this guy," he said, pointing to a photo of Marcus clipped to the file. "Find out everything you can, where he came from, who he knows, what he's doing here. Something feels off." Daniels nodded and left the room, though not without a flicker of unease crossing his face. Back at the police station, he assigned 2 officers to dig into Marcus's background. Days passed, and the reports trickled in, but none of them painted a clear picture. There was no criminal record, no outstanding debts, and nothing unusual about his financial history. Even stranger, there was little information about his life before moving to town. It was as if Marcus had appeared out of thin air. When Daniels reported back to Judge Holloway, the judge's frown deepened. "What do you mean, nothing? Everyone has a past." He snapped, slamming his fist on the table. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "We're still looking, Your Honor. But so far, it's clean. Almost too clean." Holloway leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His instincts told him Marcus was trouble, but without evidence, he couldn't act. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. For years, he'd operated with impunity, ruling the town like his personal kingdom. Now, this quiet outsider had walked into his domain and disrupted the delicate balance of fear and control he'd built. As the days went by, Holloway became increasingly paranoid. He started noticing changes around town, things that made him uneasy. Reporters began showing up more frequently, asking questions about recent court cases. Anonymous letters arrived at the courthouse, hinting at corruption and demanding investigations. Even some of the townsfolk seemed less afraid than usual, exchanging glances when his name came up in conversation. Could Marcus be behind all of this? Holloway dismissed the idea as paranoia, but the nagging doubt lingered. While Holloway wrestled with his suspicions, Marcus quietly plotted his next move. He knew the fine had been a calculated attempt to intimidate him, but instead of backing down, he decided to use it to his advantage. With the help of Lisa Carter, the state investigator coordinating his mission, Marcus filed an official appeal against the ruling. They both knew Judge Holloway wouldn't let the appeal go smoothly. It would likely lead to another dramatic courtroom showdown. But Marcus also knew that such confrontations could provide the perfect opportunity to gather irrefutable proof of the judge's misconduct. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment reviewing notes, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. This case wasn't just about exposing Judge Holloway. It was about giving the townspeople a chance to reclaim their voices. Every unjust ruling, every fabricated charge, every manipulated law. It all added up to a system designed to keep them powerless. Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how intimidating Judge Holloway tried to be, Marcus was ready. The real battle was only beginning. Marcus's appeal hearing was set for the following week, and the news sent ripples of anticipation through the town. Whispers buzzed in every corner, some hopeful, others fearful. The townsfolk knew that challenging Judge Holloway was like poking a sleeping bear, but Marcus's calm confidence gave them a glimmer of hope. For once, someone wasn't backing down. Behind the scenes, Marcus and Lisa Carter worked tirelessly to prepare for the hearing. They reviewed every detail of his case, gathering evidence of similar incidents where Judge Holloway had issued outrageous fines or penalties without justification. Lisa also ensured that undercover agents posing as ordinary citizens were strategically placed throughout the courtroom. Their job was simple: observe, document, and corroborate any suspicious behavior during the proceedings. Judge Holloway, on the other hand, saw the appeal as an opportunity to crush Marcus once and for all. He called an emergency meeting with Officer Daniels and a few trusted allies to discuss strategy. "This man is trouble," Holloway growled, pacing back and forth in his dimly lit office. "If we don't handle him now, he'll keep pushing until he exposes us." Daniels nodded nervously, knowing full well what was at stake. Together, they devised a plan to fabricate another charge against Marcus, one serious enough to scare him into leaving town for good. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. People filed in early, eager to witness the showdown between Marcus and the infamous judge. Some came out of curiosity, while others secretly hoped to see justice served. As Marcus entered the room, he walked with quiet determination, his posture relaxed yet commanding. He took his seat and exchanged a brief glance with Lisa, who sat in the back row pretending to be just another spectator. When Judge Holloway entered, the atmosphere shifted. His presence commanded attention. But this time, there was an undercurrent of tension. The judge wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice dripping with disdain, "you seem to have a habit of questioning authority. Perhaps you need a reminder of how things work around here." Before Marcus could respond, Officer Daniel stepped forward, holding a folder. "Your Honor," he said loudly, "we've uncovered new evidence linking Mr. Johnson to recent acts of vandalism in the town square." Gasps echoed through the courtroom as Daniels handed over the folder. Holloway flipped through it casually, feigning surprise. "Vandalism? This is quite serious. If true, it warrants severe punishment." Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, his mind was racing. He hadn't expected this twist, but he quickly realized it was part of Holloway's game, a desperate attempt to regain control. Without missing a beat, Marcus stood up and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I'd like to remind the court that I've been living quietly in this town, working hard, and causing no trouble. These accusations are baseless, and I'm confident the truth will prevail." Holloway smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Confident, aren't you? Let's see how far that confidence takes you." With a theatrical flourish, he declared Marcus guilty of both contempt and vandalism, issuing yet another exorbitant fine. The crowd murmured in disbelief, but Marcus remained composed. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the hearing, Marcus turned to face the judge one last time. In a voice steady and clear, he said, "Your Honor, I must inform you that I am not who you think I am. My name is Marcus Johnson, and I am the newly appointed governor of this state. Everything that has transpired here today has been recorded, and multiple witnesses are prepared to testify against you." The room erupted in chaos. Gasps, whispers, and exclamations filled the air as everyone processed what they'd just heard. Judge Holloway froze, his face pale with shock. For the first time in years, his mask of invincibility cracked. He stared at Marcus, unable to speak, as the weight of his actions finally caught up with him. Outside the courtroom, the townspeople gathered, buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Word spread quickly that the man they'd underestimated was actually their greatest ally. Marcus emerged from the courthouse moments later, flanked by Lisa and several officers. He addressed the crowd briefly, promising transparency and reform. As he spoke, the fear that had gripped the town for so long began to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of hope. For Marcus, this was only the beginning. He had exposed Judge Holloway's corruption, but the road ahead would require patience, persistence, and courage. Still, as he looked out at the faces of the people he'd come to protect, the revelation that Marcus Johnson was the undercover governor sent shockwaves not only through the courtroom but across the entire town. For years, Judge Richard Holloway had operated with unchecked power, ruling over the lives of ordinary people like a tyrant. But now, standing pale and trembling before Marcus, he realized his reign of corruption was over. The once feared judge looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own misdeeds. As officers moved to arrest him, Holloway stammered in disbelief. This can't be real. You're bluffing." His voice cracked under the pressure, betraying the arrogance that had defined him for so long. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched as the officers cuffed Holloway, reading him his rights in a tone devoid of emotion. It wasn't personal. It was justice finally catching up to a man who had abused it for far too long. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into cheers. Some clapped, Others cried tears of relief, and a few even hugged one another. For decades, they'd lived in fear of Holloway's wrath, too scared to speak out or fight back. Now, seeing him led away in handcuffs felt like a dream come true. Marcus stepped onto the courthouse steps, raising a hand to quiet the jubilant crowd. When silence fell, he spoke with calm authority. "I came here because I heard your stories," Marcus began, his voice carrying warmth and sincerity. "I saw how fear silenced you, how injustice robbed you of hope. But today, we take the first step toward change. This isn't about revenge. It's about fairness, transparency, and making sure no one else suffers under a broken system." His words resonated deeply with the townspeople. Many nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with gratitude. Lisa Carter stood nearby, observing the scene with pride. She knew Marcus's work was far from done, but this moment marked a turning point, not just for the town, but for the state as a whole. Back at the police station, Judge Holloway sat in an interrogation room, his usual bravado replaced by panic. Officers placed recordings, documents, and witness statements on the table in front of him, all evidence gathered during Marcus's investigation. One by one, they laid out the charges: bribery, abuse of power, conspiracy, and more. Each accusation hit Holloway like a hammer blow, chipping away at his defenses until he had nothing left to say. Meanwhile, Marcus wasted no time setting things in motion. He called an emergency meeting with local officials, urging them to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. "This is bigger than one man," he told them firmly. "We need to root out corruption wherever it exists and rebuild trust within our community." To his surprise, several officials admitted they'd known about Holloway's misconduct, but had been too afraid to act. Marcus assured them that cooperation would go a long way in repairing the damage. In the days that followed, residents began coming forward with their own stories of mistreatment. A single mother recounted how Holloway had fined her thousands of dollars for missing a court date due to a medical emergency. An elderly man shared how he'd lost his home after being unable to pay an inflated property tax bill fabricated by the judge. These testimonies painted a grim picture of life under Holloway's rule, but they also fueled Marcus's determination to make amends. To ensure accountability, Marcus established a task force dedicated to investigating similar cases statewide. He brought in experts from neighboring regions to review past rulings and identify patterns of misconduct. The initiative quickly gained traction, earning praise from citizens and media outlets alike. Reporters flocked to the town, eager to cover the story of how a quiet mechanic turned governor had dismantled a corrupt system. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Some of Holloway's former allies, lawyers, businessmen, and even a few politicians, tried to discredit Marcus, spreading rumors and sowing doubt. They claimed he was using his position for personal gain or exaggerating the extent of the corruption. Marcus remained unfazed, knowing these tactics were desperate attempts to protect their own interests. One evening, as Marcus walked through the now bustling streets of the town, he noticed something remarkable. People smiled at him openly, some stopping to thank him for what he'd done. Children played freely in the park, and laughter echoed through the air. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the town just weeks earlier. Marcus paused for a moment, taking it all in. This was why he'd taken on the mission: to restore faith in a system meant to serve everyone equally. Though challenges lay ahead, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. With Judge Holloway behind bars and the town beginning to heal, Marcus wasted no time turning his attention to rebuilding trust. He understood that justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about creating a system where everyone felt safe, heard, and valued. The townspeople had endured years of fear and oppression, and Marcus knew it would take more than one arrest to undo the damage. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to see it through. One of Marcus's first steps was holding a series of open forums at the local community center. These meetings were designed to give residents a platform to share their concerns, frustrations, and hopes for the future. At first, turnout was modest. Many people were hesitant, unsure if this was another fleeting effort or if Marcus truly intended to listen. But as word spread that the governor genuinely cared about what they had to say, the crowds grew larger with each session. During one forum, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the microphone. "For years, I've been too afraid to speak out," she began, her voice wavering. "But now, I feel like maybe someone will finally hear me." She went on to describe how her grandson had been wrongfully fined by Judge Holloway, forcing him to drop out of college to pay off the debt. By the time she finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Marcus thanked her for her courage and promised to review the case personally. These forums weren't just about listening. They were also an opportunity for Marcus to introduce reforms aimed at preventing similar injustices in the future. He announced plans to implement stricter oversight of the judicial system, including independent review boards to monitor court rulings. Additionally, he proposed funding for free legal aid programs to help those who couldn't afford representation. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive, though some skeptics remained cautious, waiting to see if these promises would translate into action. Marcus didn't stop there. Recognizing that corruption often thrived in secrecy, he pushed for greater transparency in government operations. He launched a website where residents could track court cases, file complaints anonymously, and access public records easily. This move earned him praise not only locally but statewide, as other communities began adopting similar measures. However, not everyone appreciated Marcus's efforts. Some of Judge Holloway's former associates, those who had benefited from his corrupt practices, worked tirelessly to undermine him. They spread false rumors, claiming Marcus was using his position to settle personal scores or line his own pockets. Others tried to discredit the reforms, arguing they were unnecessary or too costly. Despite these attacks, Marcus refused to engage in petty arguments. Instead, he let his actions speak for themselves, focusing on delivering tangible results. In addition to systemic changes, Marcus made it a priority to address the emotional scars left by years of injustice. He partnered with mental health professionals to offer counseling services free of charge to anyone affected by the judge's rulings. For many, this was the first time they'd had access to such support, and the impact was profound. People began opening up about their experiences, finding solace in shared struggles and collective healing. As months passed, the town underwent a remarkable transformation. Once empty parks filled with families enjoying picnics and games, local businesses flourished as confidence in the legal system returned. Even the courthouse, a place once synonymous with dread, became a symbol of renewed hope. Residents started referring to Marcus as the governor who listened, a title that humbled him deeply. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption wasn't limited to one judge or one town. It was a broader issue that required constant vigilance. That's why he continued traveling across the state, meeting with other communities facing similar challenges. His mission expanded beyond exposing wrongdoing. It became about empowering ordinary citizens to demand accountability and fairness. One evening, as Marcus sat on the steps of the courthouse watching the sunset, he reflected on how far they'd come. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time in years, the townspeople dared to dream of a brighter future. And Marcus, he took pride in knowing he played a part in making that possible. Years had passed since the day Marcus exposed Judge Holloway's corruption, and the town was nearly unrecognizable. What was once a place shrouded in fear and silence had transformed into a thriving community where people felt empowered to speak their minds and pursue their dreams. The streets buzzed with energy. Local businesses flourished. Schools saw higher attendance rates, and community events drew record crowds. Even the courthouse, once a symbol of oppression, now stood as a beacon of fairness and accountability. Marcus played a pivotal role in this transformation, but he never sought recognition for it. Instead, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring that every reform took root and every voice was heard. He often visited schools to talk to students about civic responsibility, encouraging them to become active participants in shaping their future. "Change starts with you," he'd tell them, his words inspiring young minds to believe they could make a difference. The reforms Marcus introduced didn't just stop at the town level. They sparked a statewide movement. Other communities facing similar issues reached out to him for guidance, and Marcus gladly shared his experiences. Under his leadership, task forces were established across the state to investigate judicial misconduct and implement oversight measures. These initiatives earned widespread praise, not only from citizens, but also from advocacy groups working toward systemic change. But progress wasn't without its challenges. Some of Judge Holloway's allies, though weakened, still clung to power. They launched smear campaigns against Marcus, accusing him of overstepping his authority or playing favorites. Anonymous threats occasionally surfaced, warning him to back off. Yet Marcus remained steadfast, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. He leaned on the support of trusted advisors like Lisa Carter and the unwavering encouragement of the townspeople to stay focused on his mission. Despite these hurdles, Marcus's efforts began yielding tangible results. Courts operated more transparently, with independent review boards monitoring decisions to prevent bias. Free legal aid programs helped countless individuals navigate complex legal systems, ensuring no one was left behind due to financial hardship. And perhaps most importantly, trust between the government and the people slowly rebuilt, a fragile yet vital foundation for lasting change. As the years went by, Marcus noticed subtle shifts in the town's culture. Conversations that once centered around fear now revolved around hope and possibility. Neighbors who had kept to themselves began organizing block parties and fundraisers. Young entrepreneurs opened shops and cafes, bringing new life to old buildings. Even the annual town fair, which had been canceled for years due to low participation, returned bigger and better than ever, drawing visitors from neighboring areas. One evening, during the town's annual celebration, Marcus found himself standing on the edge of the crowd, watching fireworks light up the night sky. Children laughed and ran around, while adults chatted animatedly under strings of colorful lights. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, tense atmosphere he'd encountered when he first arrived. As he soaked in the moment, Mrs. Thompson, the elderly bakery owner, approached him with a warm smile. "You've done good work here, Marcus," she said softly, patting his arm. "We're lucky to have you." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For all the challenges and sacrifices, moments like this reminded him why he'd taken on the mission in the first place: to give people a chance to live without fear, to build lives filled with joy and opportunity. Though proud of what he'd accomplished, Marcus knew the journey wasn't over. Corruption was like a weed. It might be cut down, but its roots could always grow back if neglected. That's why he continued advocating for education, transparency, and accountability, knowing that true change required constant effort. Standing there beneath the sparkling sky, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new obstacles, but for now, the town and the state was moving in the right direction, and that, he realized, was worth every struggle. Years later, the small southern town that once cowered under Judge Holloway's tyranny had become a shining example of resilience and reform. Its transformation was so profound that journalists, activists, and even government officials from other states visited to study how such sweeping change had been achieved. The story of Marcus Johnson, the undercover governor who dismantled corruption, was celebrated far and wide, inspiring countless others to fight for justice in their own communities. On the anniversary of Judge Holloway's arrest, Marcus returned to the courthouse where it all began. Now older, with streaks of gray in his hair, he walked through the familiar streets with a sense of quiet pride. The bakery below his old apartment still smelled of fresh bread, and the garage where he'd worked remained busy with mechanics hustling around cars. Everything felt the same, yet different. Lighter, freer, more alive. The courthouse steps drew a modest crowd that morning. Townspeople gathered to commemorate the day their lives changed forever. Some carried signs thanking Marcus for his courage. Others simply wanted to witness history. As Marcus climbed the stairs to address the group, he paused to take in the scene. Children played nearby, laughing as they chased each other, while adults exchanged stories about how much their town had grown. It was a stark contrast to the tense silence that had once filled these same steps. "Thank you for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady but warm. "This isn't just my story, it's yours. You are the ones who stood up when it mattered most. You are the ones who refused to let fear win." His words resonated deeply, earning nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. He went on to reflect on the journey they'd taken together, the struggles, the victories, the moments of doubt and triumph. Marcus didn't shy away from acknowledging the work still ahead. "We've come a long way," he said, "but we can't rest. Justice isn't something you achieve once and then forget about. It's something you nurture every single day. Our job now is to make sure no one ever has to endure what we did under Judge Holloway." After the ceremony, Marcus took a quiet moment alone inside the courtroom. The room looked different now, brighter, cleaner, and devoid of the oppressive air that had once lingered there. He ran his fingers along the wooden railing, remembering the day he revealed his true identity. It had been a risky move, but one that ultimately set everything in motion. Smiling faintly, he thought about how far they'd come, not just as a town, but as a community united by hope instead of fear. Later that afternoon, Marcus visited the local park where families gathered for picnics and games. Children swung high on the playground equipment, their laughter echoing through the air. Watching them, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These were the faces of the future, the generation that would grow up believing in fairness and accountability because they'd seen it firsthand. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat on his porch overlooking the quiet street. Lisa Carter joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've done incredible things, Marcus," she said, handing him a cup. "But I think this place has changed you too." Marcus chuckled softly, sipping his coffee. "It has," he admitted. "When I first came here, I thought I knew what justice meant. But living among these people, hearing their stories, fighting alongside them, I learned that justice isn't just about laws or systems. It's about people. It's about giving them a chance to live without fear, to dream without limits." As the stars began to dot the sky, Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling at peace. His legacy wasn't written in monuments or statues. It was etched in the smiles of children playing freely, the confidence of business owners pursuing their dreams, and the trust between neighbors who once kept to themselves. He had helped turn despair into hope, and that was a gift greater than any title or accolade. Though challenges would always exist, Marcus believed in the strength of the community he helped build. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were thrivers, determined to protect the progress they'd made. And as long as that spirit endured, Marcus knew the town would continue to shine, proving that even in the darkest times, light could prevail.